Bingo.
So he uses an unusual medium of painting on Formica with oil paint. He uses a small lathe bit to drill out the top layer of the Formica, exposing the wood underneath, which gives a very interesting texture to it. He's done it here with this building tilting out, seems to be. Moreover, he's taken this frame, which is made of Formica, which when I first saw the image, I thought that these white patches were where the drills, the screws had been in, the screw heads had been puttied over prior to a painting, but not so. In fact, he's actually taken his brush with white paint and deliberately kind of roughed up the edge of this Formica to break up the consistency of this frame. So the whole piece works in a really interesting way. Very interesting artist. I chose to place it next to this one. This is Katharine Dufault. She is a New Hampshire-based artist. I know her as a figurative artist, and I looked at her website, and she created these amazing new sculptural pieces out of wood. And interestingly, there's a storm connection here too. This was a tree that had been growing since the Civil War, and in Hurricane Sandy it fell. So I thought that was quite an interesting little connection here. She has this way of cutting slices of the tree and then honing them down to make these beautiful wafer-thin slices that she fits together to make these amazing sculptural forms with these flat planes that undulate slightly. They're reminiscent of maybe a fungi that would grow on the bark of a tree, or something like that. The natural state of the wood would be much more yellow, but because they were being included in this show, she bleached them to give them this beautiful kind of white, organic look. So beautiful. We're lucky to have two. This is a pedestal-based one. We also have one over here, which is hanging. We moved to David Licata, and he is a glass-based artist. And when I saw this piece, I knew I wanted this in the entrance. It's a stunning column made of torch-blown glass segments linked together to make this beautiful chainmail column, which actually drapes on the floor in this beautiful tail. What's interesting is that it's kind of effervescent. It looks like bubbles. It's reminiscent of all those things. Moreover, it's almost invisible to see, and yet the shadow is quite present. And I really like the fact that the shadow almost became more intense than the actual piece, which is an unusual way of things to be in the world that we know. Generally, the piece is heavier than the shadow, but in this case, the shadow reads much darker than this. Really beautiful. So each link is individually made, and he creates these in spectacular pieces. We have another one in the room, and it's in the corner, and I have it hanging, and it takes over the entire space here, again with the shadow playing into the whole form. We now move to Barbara Weiss, and she's our painter, and she does, traditional in the sense that she's painting oil paint on canvas. She's also using some crepe or paint sticks, and we have two works. We have this piece here, we have another one over here, and both of these you'll notice have a motif of a house, and they're kind of autobiographical, as most artwork is to some extent, to a greater or lesser extent. These were a series that she made while she was moving house, and she was selling the house that she raised her family in, and she was a little unhappy about it. So much of this comes through in the work. So there's this motif of a house. It occurs in both the pieces, and you'll also see these layers. There's a history happening here that we are and we are not aware of. And so it's quite interesting. She's covered it up. She's let pieces come through. We have this sense of motion, beautiful bold splash of color, legs walking off the page. It's a very interesting piece. That's Barbara Weiss. Priya Tam, she works with paper dipped in encaustic. She, in fact, was quite influenced by the way Irving Harper worked. She came to visit him in his house with me, and she saw he made multiples and created these elaborate shapes, forms, figures, and sculptures out of multiple pieces of paper stuck together. And so she took this idea and has reinterpreted it in her own way, creating these organic forms with repeating shapes. She builds up from the base. They're on a wooden base, and she builds up the bottom layer, and then she builds them inwards, and they become quite beautiful, organic flower reminiscent shapes. When I originally asked her to have a piece, she sent me an image of this, which I loved. I thought it was going to be massive, And so when it arrived, I realized it was a bit diminutive to hold an entire space by itself. So I asked for some more, and I created this column to give them a sense of being a single unit. I didn't want them interspersing, then they start separating, and it becomes this very elegant piece of, very interesting textural white-on-white paper dipped in encaustic. And just, encaustic actually is an ancient medium. It's made of molten beeswax, about 80% beeswax mixed with about 20% ground resin, which is the sap from a tree which hardens. And you mix it together, and when you fuse it, the resin bonds with the wax to give a really kind of interesting and very durable surface. So this is what she's used here. Our photographer is Arnie Kastenbaum, and I've known his work. I've kind of seen him in various different shows. We've actually shown together before, and I knew he did a whole series of white works, so I was quite interested to include one of his white pieces. And when I went to his studio to choose one, I really enjoyed looking through the different things he had photographed, and this one struck me because at first, it's a very subtle piece. It's very white on white. You're not quite sure what you're looking at first. Many people have seen it and thought maybe it was a graphite drawing. It's incredibly subtle. And then when you do see what it is, and I'll let you know, it's actually we're looking up at an angle at a square piece jutting out from the ceiling. However, we realize that our position as the viewer is from down below. So it's actually tilting our whole perspective. And I found that a really exciting little thing, that everything else in the gallery we're looking at pretty much straight up. This piece forces you to kind of understand it and to tilt your perspective. So it's a little disorienting within its very simplistic, white on white geometric planes. We have David Fox. He's another fellow English artist. Ends up that we studied with the same teacher, Archie Rand, at separate times in America. He's used a very interesting combination of old and new. He's taken little rectangles of aluminium, and onto them he's painted white oil paint. And it gives this beautiful kind of abstracted, diffuse, slightly out of focus, blurry image. And we're not quite sure what we're looking at. Are we looking at film stills? Are we looking at pieces of a negative? But all in all, very elegant. And so it's kind of a beautiful piece, but you can see the artist's hand. If you look closely, you can see areas where the paint actually is thicker than other areas. And I like this juxtaposing of aluminium with the paint on top. So you've got the artist's hand in there and the artist's hands away. So, and I like placing him next to Henry Mandel. And Henry Mandel is a quite established artist. Everyone here is a career artist. They all have a nice resume, and that's another reason I wanted to bring them all together. He's held in many kind of prominent collections up in Massachusetts and Boston, around the New York area, and even as far down as Florida. This piece is called Maelstrom 23, and it's based on a storm, and I think from the image of it, it's pretty evident that there's a storm happening. It was based on a piece of text about Charybdis and, what's the other piece? Charybdis and Scylla, which are the two hard to pass by pieces in the ocean during the Homeric times. Charybdis was a whirlpool and Scylla were the rocks, and you had to be careful about navigating your ship between these. And he's a text-based artist, and what he does, every single line was originally one letter from a piece of text about this Charybdis and Scylla myth from the Homeric myths. What he's done is put